Hey everyone, this is Jono, and in this Q&A video, I'm going to be answering the question, should I use a Facebook group or a dedicated community platform to build my community? Let's do it. What's up everybody, and welcome to another one of my Q&A videos. Now in these videos, I answer the questions that my members send me. And don't forget that becoming a member is completely free. This is where I'll send you a ton of really valuable content with tips, tricks, best practices, recommendations, templates, cheat sheets, free training, all kinds of good stuff for how to build amazing communities both inside and outside of businesses. You want to find out more? Click that link in the video description below. So I've had a wonderful question from one of my members here. This is from Bree McLaughlin. And Bree asks, hey Jono, my biggest dilemma at the moment is deciding whether or not we should launch a community platform or stick with Facebook groups. Good luck with your video project and thanks for modeling solid stakeholder relationships. So thank you for the kind words, Bree. You know, one of the things that's always been important to me is I think when you've got an audience, and in my case, it's people who watch these videos, people who read my books, people who, sign up as members. I don't just want this to be one way. I don't just want to be kind of like pushing content out. I actually want to kind of have a relationship and get to know folks. And Bree, you responded to one of my emails, and I'm thrilled to do this video. So thanks very much. So this is a really, really wonderful question because I think a lot of people who are building communities, and especially people who are relatively new to communities, will think to themselves, well, I know Facebook and I know what Facebook groups are, and I suspect most people are on Facebook. It's going to be easy to get them there. But then I see all of these dedicated platforms like Discourse or Lithium or Vanilla or Chorus, all of these platforms. Surely I should probably be using those because, you got to use the right tool for the right job. Well, I think the overall answer to this question is it depends. And I think it depends a lot on the audience that you're reaching out to. And I'm going to get to that a little bit later in this video about how I would recommend you go about making this decision that you've got, Bree. But before I get to that, I just want to spin through what I think are some of the advantages and disadvantages of both Facebook groups and of dedicated community platforms, because I think this will kind of help us to make the decision as we're going along. So why don't we start out with Facebook groups? Now, in terms of the advantages, well, I think one of the most significant advantages for a lot of people is that it's completely free. You can go to Facebook and you can sign up and you can create a group and boom, you're up and running. They're running it on Facebook. You don't have to set up your own systems. You don't have to go and do all of this complicated stuff. You're just up and running. And one of the benefits of it being free as well, and the fact that Facebook's a free platform, is that it completely lowers the friction for people to get started, right? If you create a Facebook group, if somebody's got a Facebook account, then boom, they're up and running. They can go and join your group right away. And different Facebook groups have different policies. I've worked with some communities where, you have to be a member and approved to join a Facebook group. I've worked with others where it's basically a free-for-all, anybody can join. And I've worked with others where you have to kind of sign up with an email address and then you have to be approved and you answer some questions before you get in there. Facebook supports all of these different considerations. And one of the major benefits, if not possibly the major benefit of Facebook groups, is that they are really simple to use and familiar, right? One of the hardest things in building communities is getting people into your community platform, into your community clubhouse. Whether you're using Facebook or Discourse or any of these platforms, it's getting people there and helping them to stay there. That's the most critical thing we need to do. And Facebook really lowers the barrier for a lot of people, because I would argue that most people, certainly people who are where you're building an online community, have a Facebook account. Now, this depends a little bit on location, right? Facebook registrations vary in different parts of the world, but certainly if you're building a community in Europe or in the United States, somewhere like that, then you can probably count on somebody having a Facebook account. And therefore, getting them signed up is really simple because they know how it works. They know how to post, they know how to read, all of those kinds of things. The other major benefit of Facebook is that your group is part of the overall Facebook kind of ecosystem, and therefore new posts and new changes to the group will appear in their Facebook notifications, right? So if somebody is on Facebook and they're just, doing whatever everyone does on Facebook, looking at their friends' baby pictures and arguing about unwanted political opinions, then what's going to happen is they're going to see, like in the notification box, oh, there's a new post in the group that they're a member of, and that will help to bring them in, okay? So these are all major benefits of being in Facebook. And I think overall, it's a reasonable discussion platform. Like, I think there are benefits outside of Facebook, which I'll get to in a second, but it's decent. You can go in there, you can post something, people can reply to it, people can like it. People can leave other kinds of reactions, angry and, the heart one. But for simple discussion groups, I think it's pretty decent. Now, there are some disadvantages with Facebook groups. One is that it's a third-party platform, and it's not just another platform. It's not just somebody else is running it. Facebook are in charge of this, but it's Facebook, right? And they're a company with a not particularly great track record, right? You know, there's been a lot of criticism leveraged towards Facebook, whether it's the whole stuff that went down with Cambridge Analytica, their views on privacy, you know, lots of different viewpoints about Facebook. And I don't want to get into the politics of that. That's a whole separate video, which I should probably do. But one of the risks that you do face is that when you set up any community that is in an existing platform, such as, you know, if you build a community in Slack, or if you really focus a lot on Twitter, or if you focus, frankly, putting all of your videos on YouTube, then there's always a risk that that company is either going to go away, they're going to go rogue, they're going to, you know, just go downhill in some kind of pretty negative way. And that's always a risk. The other downside of Facebook is that it's a walled garden, right? The only way to see what's inside it generally is to be in Facebook, right? And as I'm going to get to a little bit later on, one of the major benefits of setting up a community platform is that the discussions that occur in an open community, in an open community platform, will get indexed on Google. And increasingly, the way in which people find help, the way in which people look for help, is they don't go to a website. They go to one website, and that's Google. They type their question into Google, and boom, if it brings up a response, then they're good to go. So that kind of discovery from Google is really, really valuable with other platforms. You don't get that in Facebook. Stuff on Facebook doesn't really get indexed on Google, okay? So that's a real problem that I think you're gonna have to evaluate. The other problem with Facebook groups is that the analytics kind of suck, right? You can find out how many posts there are, how many topics there are, how many active users there are, and they define active users by kind of like posting and liking and doing something in the group. But that's about it. If you want to go into a much finer grained level of depth and in understanding the activity that's going on in your group, then you're kind of out of luck. And there are third-party tools that you can use to kind of evaluate Facebook metrics, but they all kind of suck as well. Like, I haven't really found analytics in Facebook to be a particularly solved problem at this point. The other downside of Facebook is that it makes it really, really difficult to integrate with other platforms. Like, so very rarely does a community platform exist in isolation, right? And this is where what kind of community you're building and who the audience are is so critical, because I'll give you an example, a community that I'm working on right now with a client. We've got their platform, which is Discourse. We're up and running. But that's also integrating with WordPress, which is where they're posting blog posts, and kind of the Discourse discussion is integrated with the WordPress discussion. We're also integrating some email management, and we're using ConvertKit for that. So all of these different pieces are kind of gluing together in different ways. And you don't really get that with Facebook. Like, when you're in Facebook, you're in Facebook, right? It's not like you can go to Facebook, as far as I'm aware, unless they've changed it since I put this video out. There's no way in which you can go and get like a list, for example, of all of your registrants and their email addresses and their details, so you can engage with them and interact with them outside of Facebook. It's not like you can use a tool like Zapier to connect Facebook very effectively with some of these other tools, sadly. So, you know, these are just things that I think you're going to want to be aware of as well. And the other downside, it's a small downside, but I think it's something to bear in mind, is that when you go into Facebook, there are a million things that can distract you away from your community. So if I go to a community group in Facebook, and another notification may appear of, hey, my sister-in-law is having a baby, and that's super important, but that's going to pull me over there. But you may also get somebody post some unwanted political opinion, and it's getting a lot of people arguing and bickering with each other, but that might pull me away. So while some of the notifications of Facebook are meaningful, such as the baby, many are not, and that can pull people out of it. Whereas in another platform, a dedicated community platform, you're all in there, right? Your attention is focused, okay? So let's talk about community platforms. Now, I'm going to be a little bit general here, because there are loads of community platforms out there. You know, as I mentioned earlier, you've got kind of like Discourse and Chorus and Lithium. You've got old school ones like PHPB, you know, all of these different platforms. And of course, each of them has different capabilities and features. So I'm going to speak kind of generally here, but you're obviously going to want to dig into the specifics of whatever platform you're evaluating. So one of the major benefits to me, well, let's go through the advantages. One of the major benefits to me is that you're in your own platform, you're running your own infrastructure, right? And that could be either using a hosted service like Discourse, for example. I have a discourse.com hosted service where you pay them and they run everything for you. Or you could run your own actual Discourse because it's open source. But either way, you're running your own service, right? So everybody who's registered, you can see all of their details. You can take a database dump of your community. You know, if you want to move it from one platform to another, then you can do that. It gives you a lot more a lot more control over kind of the configuration and the layout. And that's one of the other major benefits, is that you can really make your community look like your own community. Like when I've worked with many, many different clients, we've made their community platform kind of blend in to their look and feel, their logo, their site colors, their visual style. Whereas again, in Facebook groups, it's the usual blue kind of group, right? There's no themeability around that. You're in Facebook, so you feel like you're kind of, with Facebook, I think with Facebook groups, you feel like you're kind of in a room inside of a big building. Whereas with your own platform, you own the building, right? If that makes sense. That's probably a potentially good analogy or potentially a really bad analogy. Let me know in the comments, okay? You also, in many of these platforms, you get much richer discussions, right? So to give you an example, one of the platforms I'm a big fan of is Discourse. And what you can do in there is you can post topics and you can embed images and pictures, and you can run polls, and you can kind of respond to quoted bits of the conversation, and there's just all kinds of rich, flexible discussion that you can put in there. You can add headings and bold and italics and all this kind of stuff. You don't get to do really any of that in Facebook. It's just text, right? And that's not necessarily a bad thing. There are many communities that are very successful with very simple kind of text, like Reddit is the classic example. There's no exciting way of formatting content in Reddit. It's just text. But it works well because they've been able to build that kind of momentum. So, but you can have much richer discussions there. The other thing is that you can categorize your content more effectively. So you can kind of do this a little bit in Facebook. You can have different sections, but when you use other platforms, you can actually categorize those discussions. So you may, for example, have one area which is support questions, another might be news and updates, another one might be off-topic discussion, and they can kind of live in their own areas, and you can't really do that as well in Facebook. So you can set up any kind of categorization you really want in your own platform. Another major benefit here is analytics. Like you can get really fine-grained levels of analytics. So, as an example, I did another video, I'll link to it in the video description, where I walked through the analytics in Discourse. And I'm talking about page views from logged in users and anonymous users. You can look at something called DAMAU, which is the number of daily active users divided by the number of monthly active users. That gives you kind of a stickiness rating that you can evaluate overall, kind of like, how active, how engaged are your audience. You can track the number of posts and topics. You can look at how many people answer questions. You can look at how many people rise up these trust levels, which I'll get to in a second. You can really poke into almost any element of how your community is operating. Now, of course, these analytics vary a little bit from platform to platform, but pretty much every platform is going to give you more than what Facebook gives you, okay? And that's really valuable. The other thing that many of these platforms offer is some means of recognizing and rewarding members, right? So, to use Discourse as an example again, just because I use Discourse a lot with clients, they've got something in there called trust levels. And again, I'll link to the video that I did about Discourse trust levels, but this is where when you join the community at trust level 0, it's kind of like someone knocking on your front door and you don't really know who they are. But once they've read for a little while, then they go up to trust level 1, and certain features and capabilities open up, like they can now post links and they can now post more images and things like that. But then what happens is when they post a certain amount and they read a certain amount and they fill in their profile, they go up to trust level 2. And what I love about these different trust levels is I can then say, when you hit trust level 2, we're going to recognize and reward you and engage it with you in this particular way. When you hit trust level 3, we do more things with you. Vanilla has got, for example, the notion of points, where you can assign points to different types of interaction. And what this allows you to do is it allows you to really build out the community experience, which frankly is the most important thing you can do in a community. Just setting up a forum or a Facebook group, it just isn't enough, right? You've got to be able to say, when people get to a certain point in their community experience, what are we going to do with them? How are we going to reward them and recognize them and engage them and get them excited and keep them interested? And these points or trust levels are a great way of tying in kind of your strategy into your platform. And you just can't really do that with Facebook. The only thing you've got in Facebook groups is kind of your top 10 users, for example, your top 10 most active members. And that's a massive limitation in choosing Facebook. Another benefit that I touched on earlier on is around SEO. Like with community platforms, you can, if your community is open so people can read it, you might require people to sign up with an account to actually go and post, which is very normal and pretty reasonable. But if people can read the forum, then one of the great benefits of that is that is that it gets indexed on Google. So when someone searches for something, your web page comes up and then it takes them over there, takes you over there. Now, this is pretty normal with forums, but if you're evaluating a tool like Slack or Mattermost, I wouldn't recommend, like, you're not going to get any benefit because generally that stuff isn't indexed on Google. Okay, this is really more for forum platforms. But to be honest with you, I wouldn't recommend setting up a community in Slack or Mattermost. Real-time chat channels are not great platforms to build in scalable communities. They're great for instant messaging. They're great for kind of like grabbing someone and having a quick conversation. They're great for community meetings, but for building large scalable communities, they just don't make sense. And one of the major reasons is that because they're real time, you need to make sure that there are people in the right time zone who can help you with your question or engage with you. And once you get over a certain number of users, it's just a complete stream of consciousness. The information is not well organized, and finding previous discussions is almost impossible. That is also in itself a video that I should probably put out, is why you shouldn't choose Slack and Mattermost for these kinds of platforms, these kinds of communities rather. And then the other thing that is a great benefit of these platforms is you can integrate with other tools. You know, I mentioned earlier on that, you know, with this client that I'm working with right now, there's Discourse, and it connects with WordPress, and we're connecting it in with ConvertKit. You know, even just as a simple level with Discourse, people can sign up with their Google account or with their GitHub account or with their Facebook account or their Twitter account. That in itself lowers the friction in getting people started. So there's a lot of benefits in running your own platform, but there are some disadvantages. One is that it's just way more complicated, right? Even if you go with a hosted service like discourse.com or Discourse Hosting, or you go with DigitalOcean or Acquia or whatever it might be in terms of setting up your tools, you got to learn how they work and how to set them up and how to configure them, how to theme them. You got to have a community strategy that can naturally map to that. And that's a lot of work. That's very involved. It's a lot more work than just kind of starting a Facebook group. However, just starting a Facebook group and thinking you're going to get a community is not going to work either. Like with either option, you're going to have a very clear view of what you want to do in setting up your community and doing it well, okay? And that's one of the reasons why I recommend you go and buy People Power, my book, because it kind of walks through how to do that. The other element is that it's potentially kind of expensive, right? Some of these platforms are free, so Discourse is completely open source. If you've got the time and the energy and the expertise, you can go and run it yourself on your own platform, but you still have to pay for your own hosting. Or if you go with a hosted service, you've got to pay your monthly fees. Facebook groups are completely free. But my view is very simple when it comes to this. You kind of get what you pay for, right? And I think if you invest the time in the right kind of tools and the right kind of resources, then you often will get much better results. So I wouldn't let the expense, unless it's prohibitively expensive for you, be too much of a thing that's going to kind of put you off in that regard. There's also the major disadvantage of I'd say, these community platforms is that they're just higher friction to get started, right? You know, you got to tell someone to go to a website and they're going to go and sign up in some way, and then they got to come in. But that's not the hardest bit, getting people to sign up. It's keeping them coming back. Remember how I said with Facebook groups, the benefit is that, you know, new posts and things like that appear in your notification tray in Facebook, even if you're not in the group. Well, you don't have that with your own community platform. So you've got to regularly provide an opportunity for people to be able to come back in. And that requires more strategy. You've got to have an email strategy. You've got to have content and events and other material that keeps them coming back. And the goal here is to build a 2-month habit. With any of these communities, you want to get people coming back for at least 2 months. And then at that point, they will feel like they're getting a lot of value out of the community. They're used to coming back. They're always going there. And then your community strategy will just naturally grow. But it does require work, more work in doing that with your own community platform. So with all that in mind, I can imagine Bree and the rest of you who are watching this, you're like, okay, that sounds great. What do I do? Well, I think the first step that you want to do is evaluate your target audience, because one of the things that I think is the most critical consideration here is what are the norms of your audience. So let me give you an example. I have just wrapped up with a client where we were building 2 communities for their business. One was focused on engineers, so people who buy their product and they set it up. And this is an infrastructure product, like it's something to run online services, right? It's quite complicated. So that one was engineers, a place where they can go and get new updates about the product and features and how to deploy it and solve their technical questions and things like that. And then the second audience is executives, the kind of people who will be buying the product, but won't be involved in the setup and the configuration of it. One of the things I recommended to the company was for the executives, they'll never go to a forum. They may go to a Facebook group, but they'll never go to a forum. The most effective way to engage with those people is going to be through email and through webinars, okay? It's going to be one-on-one and then email engagement. And it might not seem like a community if you're just sending people email, but it's how you engage with them and the value you give to them and the relationship that you have from them, I think is critically important. To give you an example, when I was, a little while ago, actually what's triggered these YouTube sessions is I just sent an email to people who sign up as members and I said, what's in your mind right now? And I had like 50 responses in 24 hours. And I sent some responses to those videos I sent videos back to them using this service called Loom. But then I also took some out and I decided to make these videos that I'm putting up on YouTube. And I think engaging with people like that really is building a community. Now the engineers are different. They are more than likely to be able to go to a forum or go to a Slack channel or something along those lines because they're used to that kind of like technical engagement online, okay? So the first thing you should do is evaluate your audience. If you have an audience that you think is going to struggle going to a forum, if they don't typically use forums or community platforms, but they do tend to hang out on Facebook, then that's a good consideration. Maybe a Facebook group will be a good decision there. But if you have another community that's going to be very comfortable with online platforms, again, like in tech or something along those lines, then I think having people come to a community platform makes a lot of sense. And I think community platforms are becoming less and less weird because Facebook, Salesforce, Procter & Gamble, Random House, Harley Davidson, they're all setting up these kinds of online platforms and people are very, very familiar with it, okay? Now, one other thing you need to bear in mind as well when thinking of your audience is their views on privacy, especially when it comes to Facebook, because one of the downsides of Facebook is that if you go and join a group, when you go and post to that group, it's your personal Facebook profile that is linked. And some people don't like that. They are like, I'm not going to join a group where I go and talk to a bunch of random strangers on the internet and then they can come back and see what my family looks like and all the rest of it. And I think it's a legitimate security consideration or privacy consideration. You don't have that issue with community platforms. You go and sign up your account and unless you give people a link directly to your other, online profiles, then people they're not going to get linked to that unless they go digging for it specifically, which is probably a little bit less likely. So that's the first thing, is evaluate your audience and what's normal for them. Moving people and training people to new platforms and getting them started in new platforms it makes the whole thing a lot more complicated. For example, I learned this the hard way when I worked with a contracting organization. So this is people who, they went to build a community of like the people who do painting and decorating and glass and, remodeling houses and buildings and stuff like that. And these people were very used to phone, fax, and occasionally email. And we tried to bring them into a LinkedIn group because we thought that would be the most logical area. Complete disaster. It just didn't work. They just weren't used to that kind of online engagement. So I worked with a different contracting union much later and we started focusing a lot more on email, much more successful. Okay, so that's really, really important. Choose where they're likely to hang out. The second thing you're going to want to need to evaluate is what other tools and systems do you need your community to interface with, right? So, one of the things I've talked about previously, and I write about this in People Powered, is there's kind of three types of communities out there. You've got what I call consumer communities. These are communities of people who just get together to hang out and have a good time and talk about what they're interested in. Star Trek fans, Taylor Swift, people who like certain movies, whatever it might be. These communities are relatively straightforward to set up because all you need is kind of a clubhouse for them to hang out in. And Facebook groups are perfect for that because that's it. The community is it. There's no more to it. Now, champion communities are where people kind of get together and they produce other content. They write blog posts, they organize events, they provide support and guidance to each other, and they're a bit more complicated. And then the third type are what I call collaborator communities, which is where people come together to build things together, such as open source software and other things. So with the champion and the collaborator communities, typically you're going to start needing things like blogging tools and social media platforms, and you're going to need tools for people to work together on things, whether it's GitHub for code collaboration, or whether it's something like HitRecord for creative collaboration, or whether it's bringing people into a tool like Confluence. Or you may have an emailing strategy, like for getting people into an email list, or you may need to run webinars. All of these things need to kind of integrate and talk to each other. So I'd evaluate to what extent you need your community platform to interface with these other ones. If you need anything beyond just people going to your one tool, then Facebook is is going to be a problem, like, because it just doesn't integrate with other tools very effectively. Now, there's no reason why you can't have, like, okay, here's our email list, and then we maintain a separate group of people there as the people into the community, into Facebook group, and then maybe we have a separate place where people go and collaborate. You can do that, but it's going to require people setting up their own accounts over and over again, and that's a pain, especially when people want to change their password and things like that. So I'd just be mindful of that. If you need that kind of integration, choosing a tool that intentionally integrates with these other platforms is a lot better. Now, the other element that I just as a general rule, my kind of default position on this topic is, as a general rule, run your own infrastructure. You know, I prefer to run my own forums, run my own email platforms. I prefer to, you know, just run everything as best as I can myself. Now, I don't stick to this exclusively. Like, for example, you know, all of my training courses, I use a tool called Thinkific for that. So if you go and sign up for one of my training courses and you go to johnobacon.com/training, then Thinkific is where, you know, when you sign up, it'll take you there, and that's how all the courses are delivered and where the video's stored and all that kind of stuff. In a similar way, I put videos on YouTube. I'm not running my own mini YouTube off of my website, but for example, my website, I'm running myself. You know, community platforms that I generally work with clients, I'm running myself. So it's a balance, but if you do run your own software, if you do run your own platforms, there's three things you need to focus on. One is make it easy for people to get onboarded and how they get started, okay? So how do they find your community? How do they sign up? What's the reason why they should sign up? What's the value that they're gonna get out of signing up? Like, you gotta give them a reason. Just the whole, if you build it and they will come thing is bollocks. It doesn't work, right? So you need to give them a good reason to come back. The second thing is you need to focus on engagement. When they come in, how do you keep them participating and keep them engaged? I often use the comparison that setting up a community is a little bit like a restaurant. If you walk past a restaurant on a Saturday night and there's no one in it, you're probably not going to go in, even if the food looks good on the menu. But if the food looks good on the menu and it's bustling and there's lots of people in there, they're having a good time, they're having a drink, they're eating great food, they're doing all this great stuff, then you're more likely to go in. And you need that for your community. So how are you going to intentionally keep the engagement going, keep the conversations going, make people feel comfortable in sharing and discussing and collaborating with each other? And then the third one is recognition. Is you need to make sure that when people come in and they spend a bit of time, at some point you recognize them. And that's earlier on when I talked about those trust levels in Discourse. It's one of the reasons why I love them, because it provides a way in which the system can tell me people have hit these different milestones, and then I can tie recognition and incentives and rewards to these different people, okay? And then the final thing, don't need that. The final thing is around training. Like, whatever tool you use, if you pick Facebook groups or you pick, or whether you choose FIC, what am I talking about? Or whether you choose community platforms or whatever else, dedicated community platforms, then you need to make sure that people know what to do. Make it easy for them to understand how to start a new topic, how to reply to a post, how to format their text in different ways if they can do that. If you're working as part of a company, you need to make sure that your staff know how to get started and get participating as well. So that's really, really important, because if you don't have that kind of training, if people get stuck, then they're just not going to know what to do. And that's, again, one of the reasons why I wrote People Powered, is it kind of walks through how you set up the onboarding and do the engagement and how you recognize people and how you apply the right kind of rewards. So, you know, if you've got a few dollars in your back pocket, I'd recommend you go and get a copy of People Powered, because I think it will help to, when you choose your platform, to make sure all the stuff you do outside of the platform to make it work is going to work as effectively as possible, whether it's Facebook or whether it's Discourse or whether it's anything else. Anyway, so that's it. I hope you found this useful. As I mentioned earlier on, if you want to sign up to be a member and get all this like super valuable content with tips, tricks, templates, cheat sheets, free training, all kinds of good stuff, click the link in the video description below. And also be sure to hit that subscribe button and tap on that notification bell to stay up to date with new videos. Thank you, Bree, for the wonderful question. I hope this was useful. See you later, everyone.